Yo, what's up everybody? This is Brilly, and if you've been following me on social media, you may have seen this render of thread and embroidery I created in Otoy Octane render. So after many requests, here's the tutorial that you've been waiting for. So we're gonna jump inside of C4D, use a little bit of xparticles, and create this frame from beginning to end in Octane render from start to finish. Let's go. First thing I did was import some vectored logos into Cinema, into the interface here. So you can use any kind of geometry you want. We're gonna kind of create our own geometry to get this kind of embroidered thread look, as you see here in the reference image that I kind of built and put together already. You know, with this Phillies logo, you see that the front face here has this nice billowing out curve, kind of flat side, you know, and I used a real reference for this when I made this in 3D. So we're going to try to get as close to that as possible. But if you follow these steps, you can really apply this technique to any geometry that you want. If you're going to do a logo, I think this is going to be the best way to approach it. Again, I got this Otoy logo and I got the Octane logo, and depending on the shape of your logo, the way the embroidery technique might change. So the way we do it might be different, just all depending on the shape of the logo. So I'm going to use a couple different logos here, so then we can kind of break out from there when we start putting that thread on, and we can really see what those differences are and how we can change them. So let's go in. I'm going to grab an extrude object here, and I'll throw in the Otoy logo and make it a child of that extrude. Now, you don't want it to be super deep like this. So let's bring this back up here. Let's go, let's do it like 20. It looks like, well, that's still way too far. 5 is kind of good. I might even go a little less, like 3. Something like that on the extrusion. I might even go a little bit less. We don't really need a ton of extrusion on that face. We also are not going to need the back side of this geometry, so we can go into the caps and disable the end cap there. So it's just hollow on that back side. I'm going to reduce the extrusion even more, because this isn't really not what's going to define it. It's really going to be mostly the face that's going to define that edge. Let me throw on the garage shading and lines here. And in the garage shading and lines, once that's on, we can kind of see what our segments are doing a little bit better, because we are going to apply some beveling to the edge. Let's start increasing this. We're not going to try to get the curved front like we have here. Right? We're not going to try to give that really curved, rounded front. Through this, just begin to round the corners a little bit. And so soften this up. So that's pretty good right here. In the extrude, I've got, 1.6. I don't like having kind of weirded decimals here, so maybe I'll go to 1.5 because there's like 1.6 something. And now we have to divide the face up. So you can use like a subdivision surface. There's a lot of ways to kind of divide this face up. But we're going to go in, and on the caps right now, the cap type for the face of this is set to Ngon. I'm going to go to something like regular grid. I'm going to change and go into the actual spline that we're using as well. And instead of using adaptive, which is great, instead of using adaptive, which is the computer's way of saying, hey, we don't need that many points along this path. We only need the points where there's going to be a curve, and that's where we're going to have to put the points, so it's a smooth curve, and where it's straight, we don't need a lot of points. Well, I want to divide this geometry up a little bit more even, so I'm going to change it from adaptive to uniform, right? And so now I can go back into the extrude, and I can open up this cap type regular grid, and I can begin to make this smaller in here, so I can divide this face up a little bit more. I might even be able to go into the number of points in uniform and increase that, so we get something that's really kind of nice and divided just like that. And we're going to basically be using this, so we're putting these segments in here so we can deform the surface of this. If we just have one flat polygon in here, we can't bend a polygon, so these faces that we're having is going to allow us to bend this outward. So this is pretty good where we're at. So I'm going to right click it, and I'm just going to say current state to object, and we'll turn this off for now, but we can always get back into that. I'm just going to relabel this Otoy. Let's drag and drop that down. And I'm going to do the same thing for this logo. Same exact steps. I'm not going to have that one recorded. Same exact steps. And we'll just start back with this completed and done in the same way. Okay, so we've got both of our logos created now. When I'm using logos and creating any kind of mesh at all, any geometry, I try not to have super messy stuff like I have here. You know, like this is all improper open-ended points here and things aren't connected and a lot of tries and mixture of quads and tries. I'm going to try to throw this inside of a remesh and let's see if it cleans this up, because the surface of the geometry is really actually going to be pretty important to me here. This actually does a pretty nice job. So the mesh itself will be pretty important because we are going to take particles and we're going to flow those particles across the surface of the geometry, and having nice topology is really going to help us. So nice edge flow and things like that. That actually works really, really well. So I'm going to do the same thing for the Otoy logo here. So let's throw that same remesh on. And yeah, that's nice and clean. Okay, cool. So I'm just going to make both of these editable. There we go. Now we've got nice clean logos that we can start our next part of the geometry. So remember I said I wanted to have the front face of this having a nice smooth curve. What I'm going to do for that, to get this nice smooth curve, is I'm actually going to use our sculpting tools. Now, if we hop into our sculpt setting here, and I go to the there's a lot you can do. Inflate, you can do pool. There's many different methods that we can kind of go here, and I will turn the symmetry on for this. Let's see, which direction is it here? There we go. Okay, and I'm just going to make my brush a little bit larger, and it might change because it does get thinner in this area. And I don't want an extreme difference, but let's start slow and let's like pull and grab. I might need to change a little bit of this brush size because I don't want it to start expanding too much out onto the sides. And I might just smooth those out a little bit. And it's okay if it's a little off, okay? So don't feel like it's got to be perfect. This is not about it being a perfectly smooth surface. So there can be little imperfections in it because it's an embroidery technique that we're doing. And so that's just layers of these threads overlapping each other. We do want it to be like smooth and not like crazy lumpy, but it doesn't have to be uniform. And I think the more natural and realistic that you're going for, the less of that you need to worry about. And it's actually going to be helpful for it not to just be one uniform curve. Otherwise, we could have just selected like a loop edge here and did like a soft selection and brought it out really kind of evenly. So there's a lot of other techniques that we could have done. But I think this is a good one. I'm going to turn my work plane grid off here just so that mesh is not, you know, colliding too much with itself. Just kind of clicking through here, making that nice and curved out. I might just bring this edge out a little bit more. Same thing with this edge. Right, so just get it to where you're happy with it. So now if I look at this, this is pretty good. I might bring out this bottom face a little bit more. Excellent. And you can always go in here and grab something like the smooth tool. Let me just expand the size up, and I'm going to bring the strength down a little bit. Right, and so you could always come in here. And we should probably just turn on symmetry. This will save us some time. Right, and if you're like, you know, if you got a little bit too bumpy in there, that'll kind of smooth that out. Now we just got to do the center. The center should go fairly quick. I don't need symmetry for that. I'm going to just change my brush size up a little bit more. Left and right bracket keys, just like Photoshop. Brush size will do in here as well. Click, hold, and drag. Maybe bring it down just a little bit. I don't want to expand the edges out too much here, so I'll bring this brush size down maybe half of that. And I'm just click holding and dragging here and slowly bringing out the face. All right, now let's rotate to the side. Might have gone a bit extreme on that one, but it's not a big deal because we can always go right into the smooth just like we did before and tone this back a little bit. Let's just look. There we go. So that's a nice curved surface. Again, having imperfections is something that I've noticed will make this feel a little bit more believable and realistic. Okay, I'm going to apply that same technique that we did to the Otoy logo now to the Octane logo. All right, so now that we've got both of our logos here built, the next thing we want to do is actually get our edge selection. So I'm going to go into, let's see, the model mode here. And in the model mode, let's go into edge mode and let's select our Otoy logo first. And I'm going to grab a loop selection. And we're going to be making a particle system here. And we are going to be emitting particles from the edge of this geometry. And that's how we're going to get that thread that wraps around. It's first going to start along these edges and then it's going to cover over top of that surface. And again, depending on what your geometry looks like here, what you're making embroidery thread with, it's going to depend on what edges you actually have selected. So the edges that I have for the Otoy logo will be different than what I'm going to end up using for the Octane logo, but we're going to see that in a little bit here once we start this particle system. So with those edges selected, those back edges on the face here selected, I'm going to go up to mesh and edge to spline. And it says Otoy logo spline. That's actually the perfect name for it. Okay, and now I'm going to do the same thing on the Otoy logo. Now I've built this before to create some fun test rendered frames here. So I know that for this Otoy or the Octane logo, it's not going to give me the correct results emitting particles from this edge. Not the, and again, maybe for the look that you're trying, it will. But for the look that I'm trying, which is kind of like, the embroidery that you would see on like a hat or something like that, I kind of want it a little bit more clean and flowing, where this was giving me a little bit more chaotic results. But again, we're going to look at that in a little bit. So I'm just going to select both of those edges for now. And we'll go to mesh and we'll say edge to spline on this as well. Next, let's begin to set up our xparticles system here. So I'll hop back over into my standard mode and let's go to Insidium. We'll go to xparticle and emitter. So we're going to use an emitter and we're going to change it to emit from an object. That's going to be our main goal here. So if you jump in to where it says emitter shape, we're going to change it from rectangle to object. Now we're going to be emitting, first let's do it to the Otoy logo. We're going to be emitting from this spline that we turned the edge of this geometry and selected edge from spline. So I'm going to bring down that Otoy logo spline here, and instead of emitting from a polygon center on a spline path, we are going to say points. Now the points on this, let's hide the geometry for a second, just make this visible, and let's go into the points. There's actually a fair amount of points on this already, and that's basically how I had it set up because of changing it to uniform. Now there are something like the inside of the circle here, which doesn't have the same kind of even amount of spacing as it does around the other end, and that could make a bit of a difference. I don't think for this it's going to be all that big of a deal. If it is, we can always change the points to any spline path that we have here very, very simply. So if we were to take a look at just these points right here, right? If you want to add some more points to any spline path too, you can always just go up to mesh, add, subdivide, and you can add points in there just like that. That's how I just selected just that individual section. Obviously, if you want it, and you could just select all and it would divide up everything as well. But now you can see these are all kind of more uniform. So the particles that are going to emit out are going to be more symmetrical across the whole thing. They're going to have the kind of same distance and spacing. So, all right, we've got our basic emitter set up. in the system here. Let's turn this geometry back on of that logo. And on this, we need to say, hey, we wanted to follow the surface of this geometry that we created. So we wanted to follow the surface of the Otoy logo. So with the X particle emitter selected, let's go back up to Insidium, X particles, go to modifiers, motion, and say XP follow surface. And now we'll want to place our geometry in here of the actual Otoy logo. So we're emitting from a spline that's from the edge selection of that logo, and then we're following the surface of the actual geometry, the polygon geometry of that surface. So I want to offset these particles. Let's just hit play really quick. You can see this is definitely not doing what we're hoping to quite yet. And since we want to kind of follow the particle system a little bit more, we also want to add a trail to this, because the trail is actually what we're going to be using to create the thread for the particles as well. So hopping up back to Insidium, I'll go to xparticles, generator, and XP trail. All right, so now you can see as the particles move, we're finding the direction in which they're going. Right now, pretty clearly, there's a couple things that stand out. One, I don't want the points to draw on the particles to kind of draw on and emit as the rate and the direction that they're going. Let's first start with the direction. And let me just get back into my live selection here. And let's go into emitter. In the object tab in the emitter, we can go down to particle direction, and it says normal. Let's change this, and let's change this again. This could be different depending on which way your geometry is facing. I'm going to say the Z axis, and let's go back and hit play now. Now you can see that it is going forward and backward instead of to the side. Now let's hop back into the follow surface here. If we hit play again, we can see that the distance is probably offset too much. So let's bring this number down. I don't know what it's going to be quite yet. Okay, cool. Now you can see that we are getting the particles moving off the surface. Now I can see that the particle direction is the opposite in which we need it to be. Let's go back to the emitter. We got a positive Z axis. Let's move along the negative Z axis. And let's hit play now. Okay, so now at least we're starting to get some results here of this moving along the surface. Now if we go back, hit play, right, we can see where this is beginning to break, but we can also see that it's not really sticking to the surface how we imagine. Well, there is a radius to each of these particles. So let's set up the emitter, and all these things are kind of going to go hand in hand here eventually. So if we go into the emissions tab, I'm going to change the emission from rate to shot, and I'm going to change the shot count from 1,000 down to 1. Keep all this the same. Let's take our speed back here. No, let's say to 30. And here's our particle radius. And if we bring this number down, then it should give us a particle on the surface. Now, remember, I have a shot count here set to 1. Let's change this radius from 3 to something really low, because I want it to be a thread along the surface. And I can always go back into the follow surface and change this offset to 0.1 here as well, maybe give it a 0.1 variation. So we know that it's going to offset from the surface 0.1, and then there's going to be some paths that have a variation of 0.1, so some might go back onto the surface as well. And distance, maybe we'll just increase that a bit more. So there's a little bit more offset from this actual logo. Let's hit play now. Okay, perfect. So now we only have one particle, right? We realized that that was going to happen though. If we go back into our emitter and go into object, I'm going to say one particle per source element. And if I check that on, you're going to see now each one of those points now draws its own line. Now this is like really kind of uniform currently. We might want to throw in some turbulence in here in a moment to try to break up how perfectly machined this is and give a little bit more of that variety. We're also going to need more particles in here. So to add more particles, we have one of two things that we can do. let's go into our emitter, because one of the things that we can do is we can add more points, right, without changing the geometry, because we're just working with this spline path that we're emitting. So we can divide this up and just emit more from there. Or, you know, instead of emitting along this spline here, we can go, and so we can and the points on that spline, we can say the edges of that spline, and then go to the emission and change the shot count number here from 1 and bring this up, and you can see now we can get a lot more points. Sometimes I try to recommend treating different parts of the logo. See, this is built of 2 separate pieces, and treating them a little bit different, and having 2 particle systems, you know, for each one of those. Sometimes that's nice. We'll see if this can work. Basically, what we're going to try to get to stop happening is these big gaps in here, and we're going to want to try to get those a little bit more dense. So let's increase the particle amount here. We'll go to 2000. That's doing pretty good. I think now if we start messing a little bit more with some turbulence, we might be able to kind of offset and give a little bit more variation to where these fall. I might go a little bit more. Let's go up to 3000 for this and hit play here. Now, I'm not too worried about them following this inside edge. That's going to be tucked inside. This is going to be sitting on a surface of a piece of geometry, and that's going to be kind of tucked in there. Let's select our emitter, and we'll go back up into our Cydium tab here, xparticles. And now let's go and grab a turbulence. So modifiers, is it a motion here? And turbulence, XP turbulence. So let's add some turbulence in this. Now the direction is going to be something that we're going to be taking a look at, as well as the noise type in here. And this is all going to be up to you in the art direction that you want to have with your specific logo. Or rather, like thread, you know, whatever the object is that you're creating this embroidery for. All right, let's start our playback over, and let's just see how crazy this is right now, because we haven't changed anything. Okay, not really a whole lot of difference. Definitely a little bit of difference, though, and it could be due to our scale. So let's bring this scale back. Let's go back to 50 on this. Right, and now you can see how we're getting some particles that are sweeping across the surface. Let's go back even more. Let's go down and change our scale to 25. Okay, interesting. Let's try changing the noise type. You know, let's go to wavy turbulence. Whoa, absolutely crazy. Let's bring, okay, the scale is at 0. Let's change that from 0 to 1. Right? Who knows? This could be a really cool look. This is not what I'm going for this, but there could be a lot of really interesting thread patterns that you create here. Let's go and maybe increase the overall scale of this and maybe decrease the strength. But now you can see that we're covering the surface in kind of a more mesh-like way, you know, with almost like a spider web, lots of overhanging, crisscrossing. This is not how I've discovered is the best look for creating the thread embroidery. It's really long sweeping motions that kind of come across. So let's bring the strength down to 1. Let's increase the scale. Let's double that, and let's hit play. A lot of this is just, you know, part of, you know, going through it and process here of elimination. Sometimes, you know, you can change the angle in the axis in which that turbulence is moving. Let me just keep increasing this strength here slightly. That's not bad. That is not bad at all. It is kind of giving me a nice variety here. We can always go back if we're not happy with it. Now, this is looking fairly good. It is creating more gaps than maybe I was hoping for. Let me turn the strength down to 3 and go to the emitter, and let's emit 4,000 particles here, and I will hit play. Not bad. And obviously you can see as I'm letting it kind of cook out a little bit more. We're getting more. I'm going to add 5,000 particles. And let's run this through. And, you know, as it plays through, it's kind of filling in some more of those gaps. And again, it matters what your, you know, thread wants to be. And a lot of these gaps we can fill in with a texture on the geometry and have it not really be noticeable at all. So this is pretty good. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this trail that we've got. I'm going to right click it. I'm going to say current state to object. And I'm just going to turn that off. All right. And I don't really need this system anymore either. So I'm just going to turn that off as well. So now we've got our X particle path. And that is going to be the thread of this geometry. So if we like zoom in here, we can see all the paths. Now it is getting a little bit heavy, and I have a feeling a lot of that is due to the density of the particles along this inside edge. But because we've now baked this trail down, what we could probably do is go into point mode. And if I go into my 4-up view and grab my rectangle selection, I might in fact be able to come in here and grab, missed it that time, grab this whole edge and highlight all the particles there that would be disappearing. Looks like when I was doing some of those sculpting tools, I grabbed that part of the edge. I'm not all that worried about that. And I can just straight up delete that. Let's see if that messed up anything here. Let's go into this mode. Yeah. Oh, no, it definitely did. Let's go in and close spline. Yeah, well, maybe we can't delete that edge. I'm not 100% sure why that happens and it interprets that way now. Let's undo that delete. Maybe we unfortunately just can't delete that edge. That's okay. You might find another clever way of going about that. I've never deleted that one before, but I thought, hey, you know what? It's creating a lot of extra points. Maybe there's a nice efficient way we can kind of clean that up. All right. So now we've got our kind of mesh here. So what I've done before is sometimes this spline path can get a little heavy, especially when it comes down to render time and how it's actually textured and all that. And so what I've done before is I've taken this XP trail, and I'll just call this, I'm going to call this the threads, right? I've taken the threads here and I've gone into simulate, hair edit, and convert from spline. So I've turned this into like hair, and this has worked a lot more efficient for me as well. So you might find that this is a nice benefit for you too. So, okay, so now I've got this and I've converted this into hair. So I can just simply put a really basic hair material on this. Now let's set up some materials and some lighting. So let's just grab our Octane Live Viewer. And we can preview what this is looking like right now. And let's create a hair material for this. So we'll say new hair material, come in. I'm just going to make this a completely white thread. I mean, I guess you could give some sort of, light gradation to it, not pure white. I try to not do anything that's either pure black or pure white. So we can just go a little bit off from that. And let's just apply this hair to our geometry and thickness. Let's bring this down. And you can give a little variety. You can already see here what we're starting to get. And let's come in. And again, you can start messing with certain settings on the hair too if you want to add a little bit more to it. Now if I added some frizz here, maybe this is entirely too much, so we can dial maybe the percentage of how much it's kind of frizzing out, change some of these percentages. right? Maybe reduce the amount to 1. Maybe it's still getting a little crazy here for you. You know, you can turn it off though. Let's go like 2 and 2. Dial it back. So it is frizzing a little bit. It's not perfect. There's some imperfections. Again, you don't have to do that, but you can. But now we've got a really nice thread look. So I'm just going to make another material, and I'll just make a I'll make a glossy material here. And in this glossy material, I'm just going to kind of jack up the roughness. And let's just throw this on as our base. It's already off white just a little bit there, and I will add this to the Otoy logo geometry that's kind of underneath. Now I'm going to put we'll just do like a plane, and let's change the axis of the plane and simply move this back in Z space here, enough just to cover that back edge a little bit. Yeah, something like that. And now we're going to be able to set up some cameras and do some basic lighting work to get this thing to really kind of pop and look great. So in my camera here, let's increase the focal length. I'm going to go with something like 80. And let's look through the camera here. And let's zoom back out. And let's get in our Octane camera here. Let's go into our thin lens. Got to get some depth of field going. Do focus pick right there on the hair. Let's add some increases aperture here. And let's start to get some lighting. Let's go and grab Octane light and add a area light. And pop out of my camera here for a moment. Let's bring this area light up and over. Maybe we have this rotated a little bit on an angle. Minimum lights is a nice thing. Sometimes, you know, people tend to overlight. Let's bring this light intensity down. I'm going to get an HDRI too in a second, so this light might just be like filling a little bit here. Let's bring this intensity down, and everything's still very much just lit, overly lit right now. Let's take this plane. I'm just going to move it a little bit more in, something like that. And we'll get a surface on here in a moment. And let's go to objects and HDRI environment. Let's go in and import an HDRI. So I've got a bunch of Grayscale Gorilla HDRIs. I got to reset up my link here, but let's go into some Studio Basics, and I'm going to grab this Basic Studio 3 and let's import that in. And then after that, let's open our settings. I'm going to change to path tracing. I want just some more accurate balanced light here. Let's close that out and let's refresh the render. All right, starting to get there. You can see now we're really, just with a little bit of lighting, some more contrast here. Let's make another material. And you know, this one, let's I don't use this all the time, but this could be really nice. Let's open up this live database here in Octane, and let's go into some fabrics. Maybe there's something quick and easy we can do for just adding a basic fabric texture here. I don't even know what this fabric is. That one looks kind of cool though. They got all sorts of ones, velvet, you name it. I kind of want one that has a little bit of visibly obvious thread. I'm sure I can, you know, do one of these cloth, like make it a little bit smaller. Let's try this one though. Let's download that. This is downloading the material. It is important that when you're using the Live Manager, it says here, please save the scene before downloading any material. I did that, right? So just make sure you keep that in mind. And let's add this onto the plane. Fine, that gives just a little bit of like variety to the background. Now the thread, again, doesn't have to be white. We can change this, and let's change the color. Let's change this to Let's change this to red. I guess I only need one here because I'm not using the actual gradient to this. That's kind of cool. And let's grab this base material and let's do the same thing. Sweet. And I might move the plane back just a little bit more that we're using as kind of this background. I don't need any segments on it either. That's something that a lot of artists forget. They're just using default stuff. But remember, we do have a lot of points on this, so anything that we can kind of save will be good. I like that it's giving us this little bit of an edge here, though. See if I can get it kind of perfect there. You know, that feels like it's like, you know, actually like thread and sewn on a little bit more. And as always, you can change anything here. We can go into the hair material, maybe the thickness we want, you know, 0.15 and 0.08 or 0.1, right? I like having variety here, so we could do like 0.05, I don't know, variation. So it just gives the thread a little bit more thin or thick. Go back to this frizz amount here and maybe increase this. Let's see what 2 does. And again, this is all just part of like the fun now of starting to art direct your look. I like that. That's feeling very much like a pretty cool, interesting thread here. Let's go into our camera tag again, the Octane camera, because we haven't even begun to start enabling the camera imager and start to mess with this. You know, take a look at this highlight compression. That's kind of nice. Maybe mess with the gamma, bring this down a little bit. Let's go to the vignetting, right? Have it kind of darker everywhere else. Maybe go back into our hair material. Let's bring this thread frizz up even more. Let's bring up this value here, the frizz level. I don't really like how it's separating at this point. Let's bring this back up to a scale of 100. I mean, it's interesting, you know, you're definitely getting something that's feeling a little bit more organic and less perfected. So this is something I say, you know, just play around with. You have no idea, you know, what is going to kind of stand out. We can mess with the scale of this as well. Let's bring the scale down. Whoa, not that much. That's wild. Oh, because it's got a variation of 20. So let's bring this to... Looks like it's got to be a lot higher than that. Let's figure out what that number is. I actually have no idea. Let's turn off the geometry because it's kind of an interesting look that we have going here. Let's turn that Otoy logo off so we can just see it. And let's see, what's the number here? I don't know. This might be one that I play with some other time. It's kind of interesting. Let's bring it back to 100. Let's turn that logo back on and let's turn the amount down. Yeah, right? So you see what's happening to the logo. So lots of cool looks. Let me go into the frizz and turn that frizz off. Okay, so the frizz doesn't seem like it's affecting those. That's part of the scale. Let's bring the amount down to something low like 1. That's kind of interesting what it's doing here. Again, more and more just adding lots of, let's turn that frizz back on and let's increase the amount. Let's bring this back up higher. Right, so play with stuff. This is where it gets like some really cool, unique thread looks here. And so we're just going through all the different possibilities and varieties that you can now get with the different types of thread. So let's turn that frizz off and back on. You can see how the difference that we're getting. Let's go into that scale and let's see if I can do like 0.25. Can we go lower? Yeah, 0.1. Lots of cool interests here, right? I'm really kind of digging this. Let's go back into the frizz. Let's go like 10%. Let's pull that in a little bit. Let's go 2%. Very cool. Let's just change the camera angle a little. And obviously we still have our good old Octane logo off to the side. Let's just hide that for now. And this is feeling really kind of nice. Okay, so I did say, hey, we're going to take a look at this Octane logo too, because you might have kept up so far with this training series and been like, I've done everything, but my logo is not looking like this. Well, there are some different and varieties and variations to logos, and you might have to interpret or change up what you're doing with the particle system depending on that. So let me just come in and let's change. I'm just going to turn my materials off for a moment, and that way everything's a little bit more visible. And let's go back to that Octane logo. So if I were to just take this spline path, right, because we already have this nice setup going here, and if I were to go and turn on my xparticle system as well as the trail, and I go into my emitter, and instead of using the Otoy logo, which we have done right now, I'm going to now drag and drop the Octane logo into there. And let me just hide my light, my area light. I'm going to turn that off. There we go. And if I hit play, oh, you know what? that would be something that we'll want to have off. So let's go into the hair. Let's go in dynamics and say disable dynamics. I hope you saw that before you hit play. If your computer and everything crashed, my bad. This is actually really kind of cool too. Like, I don't know, I feel like there's so many really cool looks that we can get out from this tutorial right now. And then we also have to go to follow surface, right? And let's put the Octane logo in there, and we can simply disable the Otoy logo, right? Just by unchecking that. And if I hit play now, you can see just like that, we are wrapping that surface up. Now, I messed with this one before, and I didn't really like how it treated the corners. Let's just say we're happy and we accept it right now, just so we can kind of take a look and see what in fact it's doing. And so if I go up to my XP trail, I'm going to right click, or actually no, I'll keep this as, no, I'll right click and I'll say current state to object. There we go. And I'll say thread Octane 01. And now I'll come into my simulate, hair edit, convert from spline, and I can turn that off. And let's turn off my xparticle system here. All right, so now we've got the same exact setup. So let's just drag and drop. And let's go to hair, and let's go to dynamics, right? And make sure the dynamics are turned off on that. That's kind of nice and important. And let's just add the same materials to everything. So I'll add that red to the logo. I got the hair material on there. And let's get a render going. Let's enable that light back on. Let's change our focus over here. And I'm not unhappy with it, but see how it's so messy and all over the place. And I started like really paying closer attention to how embroidery work happened. And the machines, you know, didn't just start here and kind of then come and finish a line over here. You know, they would go the shortest length possible and be very uniform and a lot more kind of streamlined. Now, this is still a cool look, and depending on what you're doing, this could be the right way. But this feels more like the fibers in fiberglass, right? And so if you were trying to make fiberglass and have that pattern, this is kind of what that feels like. And there's a lot of crossover to create that more support and structure, rather than going and having a visible grain where it could separate. So the fibers are supposed to overlay with fiberglass, where in the embroidery work, there seemed to be a much more recognizable pattern to it. And so having it set up like this didn't enable me to get that pattern. So let's pause this render. And let's step back and go back and turn on all of our particle system here. And I'm going to delete this old hair. We don't need that anymore. And let's turn on the trail as well. So what I noticed was for this Octane spline logo, let me just solo that for a moment, that emitting particles from this outside edge, because of how many corners it has all along here and the curve of the shape being faced in different directions, it caused all those particles to move in all sorts of crazy directions. And what I would recommend if you have a logo like this is try to find the most smooth or surfaces or angles of that edge that are all kind of facing in a similar direction or point. And so for me, it's this inside. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to separate out this spline here. So I'm going to say, I'll say Shift C, and let's say, I don't know where the new groups to objects is. Let's go. Well, let's look for it. Let's go to spline, add, remove, and here it is, segments, explode segments. And now this is going to give us the Octane logo spline, we'll say inside. And that this inside circle is going to be the place that we're going to be emitting points from. Now, if we take a look at the points here, we remember we changed it in our emitter to go from the edge. So the number of points shouldn't make much of a difference here, but we do need to update this in the emitter and say, hey, just from the inside of that now. Let me turn that solo off. And now let's hit play. And so now you can see that we're getting a totally different kind of sweepy motion that moves across. And again, it's kind of got a pattern to it now. And so if we come back in, I might need to add some more particles to this because, you know, they kind of cluster together as it comes out. So let's go into emission. Let's go to like 8,000 particles. And, you know, hey, you can add in different points in various spots here. You know, where it's missing, I might now have to mess around and change the turbulence. Maybe the turbulence is not giving us the right effects. Let's just turn this off and let's see if it creates something a little bit more uniform. Well, it does create something a little bit more uniform, but I want to space these out. So we do know that the turbulence will have a pretty big effect on it. So let's go back into the turbulence. And in this turbulence, you know, let's change it to standard and let's see what that looks like. Standard's not doing a whole lot. Maybe increase the strength here. Let's go 25. Oh, well, it would help if I turned it on. There we go. Let's hit play again. Pretty wild. I probably need to turn that strength down a little bit. Let's go down to 10. Right, I don't want this thing to happen because that's gonna begin to make it look a little bit odd. We could try to limit the turbulence so it's not on like the y-axis, so maybe it doesn't curl and bend up like that. Now let's change it from standard. Let's go back to like let's just have fun. Let's see what curl does for a minute. Imagine, yeah, curl's gonna be kind of out there and wild. Let's bring the strength way down, and I'm gonna turn Y back on. Really kind of cool, right? So there are gonna be tons of different looks that you do. Let's go back, and I think the wavy turbulence is giving us something that's the closest. And let's just increase the strength here. We'll go to 5. And the scale can have a lot to do with it as well. Let's bring the scale down to 10, strength to 3. Play through this. So you really do have to play with it. Now you can see that I am getting a lot more of this area covered. Not so much up here. That'll be up to you all to just continue to play to kind of get it. You can also, don't forget this, you can also take this where it's at and say, current state to object, make this into the hair, just like before, and then run another particle system and have both of them on at the same time, and then convert it to hair again. And so, you can have multiple things that fill in the gaps. But let's just take a look at where it is right now. So I'm going to go to the XP trail. We'll right click. Obviously, we're going to have that big gap at the top. I'm not going to worry about that right now. I'm going to say current state to object. Let's turn off our particle system, and let's select that. Go to simulate. Hair edit and convert. Let's turn that spline path off, and let's add the hair to that, and let's preview this. Very nice. Let's go into our camera. Right, and because we're doing this thing up here where we're putting on the geometry a very similar material, and like I could add a bump to that and put like some lines in it and make it feel like it's thread too, and you would fill in those gaps as well. But now you can see how nice and kind of a little bit more structured this is. Now I do have on this hair material, remember, I do have frizz and I do have the on there, which was kind of giving us a couple of those loose strands and making it feel a little bit more chaotic. But if you look at this now, this is really beginning to feel a lot more like some kind of nice embroidery here. And let's shift our focus down here to that Octane or Otoy logo. So really kind of nice, really easy setup to do to get some really high-end thread and stitching, and then through this even like fiberglass techniques and stuff like that. But go through a couple of key things just to kind of reiterate here that I noticed was in the turbulence, right? Playing with the different modes, and this can take a little time, but this is where you kind of get to have that fun and art direct a little bit more. And then within the hair material itself, with the frizz, with the scale, and you can give some more interest and variety to that as well. And the only other thing sometimes is hair, or the thread rather, can look like it's a little bit too much on top of each other. Note that you can go to the follow the surface and you can increase the offset. You can increase the distance and the variation between all of this stuff too. And those are going to be some really keys to help you further art direct this to get the exact look that you want. Thank you everybody for watching. I hope you found this training really useful. And if you decide to create something using this technique, please tag me. I would love to see the results. And there's going to be a lot more training. Hey, a lot more free training from me in the near future. So stay tuned, more to come.